only one person to blame for all this madness here tonight.
It's just what guys want to do. They just want to sit around all day, kind of drink a lot, get a little bit banged up and lose some money on basketball. So that's what the common guy likes doing. That's what we do.
So he does a sales job and then he comes to you with a
preposterous when the newspaper business was completely failing. He says, I'm going to start my own newspaper, free newspaper. And he's very fortunate that we both love him and have faith in him and figured that we were taking some money, probably his graduate school money, and said, you know what, go for it.
I was given this money and I'm saying to myself, I don't really know what this is for.
I bought, I want to say, maybe 100 of those news racks, and we just put them all over T stations. We just drove all over Metro Boston, everywhere from Braintree, Quincy, T-stops I didn't even know existed. So we did about 48 hours of just putting the news racks in the spot. The next process was getting the newspaper actually printed. We had a girl, Erin Boyce, who was a friend of a friend. She became, for the entire newspaper days, the person who would put it together.
I really only thought it'd last like maybe 6, 12 issues. I'd been in the newspaper industry for many years, and to start a publication in like a dying industry is kind of unheard of. Little did I know 200 issues later, it would become part of my life for almost 9 years.
And I bought an Astro van, maybe the best purchase I ever made. Thing was a beast. It got booted by City Hall while I was in a bar. Like I was 2 feet away, they booted it, came out, saw it, ran to City Hall, like paid it, and then they unbooted it, and I just continued with the paper route. It got stolen, and then it just reappeared. They just drove it till it ran out of gas. And they smashed it with a screwdriver to start it. I could never use the keys to start the thing again. I had to use my seatbelt, like to turn it on, and I couldn't tell when it was on and when it was off.
That was one of my first jobs at Barstool, was making sure the tickets were paid, because he was getting hundreds and hundreds of dollars of fines.
You open up the glove compartment, they come flying out.
It was on Canal Street outside the Garden, so I put the car there, and I forgot to put it in park, and it just rolled down the street and literally scraped 100 straight cars. So I just fucking sprinted, jumped in, and peeled the fuck out of there. And I'd scream at all the other people handing out newspapers, like competitive. I'd just scream at them. Like it used to be a black and white newspaper, and then we upgraded to color, and I was just screaming, like, we got color now, we're so much better. It was whatever the hook was. All right, so this is the first paper. My mom found it the other day. August 27th, 2003 is the birthday of Barstool. I do remember one of the stories. I had this elaborate design for the logo that my buddy drew, and then I went to print it, and they were just like, there's no way we can print this logo, it's too detailed, and it had to go to print, so he just used clip art. The guy just, like, the newspaper guy just went to, like, clip art. I don't even know, I still have it, and he just like, how's this stool? I was like, that's fine. But it was really fantasy sports and gambling lines and things like that. That's what it was for the very beginning. We may not win, but we'll battle like hell for you. Sign up for free picks at BarstoolSports.com. Suffolk Downs horse racing, Mortal Locks still all the way. I wonder how I did this week. The Daily Line. And I'd write under pseudonyms, fake names. I didn't want people knowing that it was just me doing the company. It was like, how can I make it seem bigger than it actually is? Let me know at Blue Velvet at BarstoolSports.com. Is that what the name I went with? Blue Velvet? The early advertisers that we had were the gambling places I talked to online. But I knew that wasn't enough. So what I did, it's like I wanted Morton's Steakhouse to advertise or Abe and Louie's. So I'd just take a picture of Fleming's Steakhouse and I would stick it in the newspaper. And I'd call Morton's, be like, hey, your competitor's advertising, man. Like, you better get on this. They'd be like, why is this ad in? Who sold it? What? I'm like, oh, somebody bought it. They're like, let me talk to the salesperson. I'm like, salesperson's fired. He's not here anymore. Dish Network, probably not a real ad. Kitty Links, definitely a real ad. Like, men may think that diamonds are a girl's best friend, but if they only knew. Erotic gift baskets and pleasure toys for all occasions. That was probably real. You know, there wasn't much to it. It was gambling, and that's what it was. It's supposed to be a gambling newspaper. Gambling and picks. It's slowly morphed, but it sucks and it stinks and it sucks. That's what this paper did. There was no way this would have worked. But we were always really good at changing quickly and figuring out. It's like how I thought this would, advertise just to like Mohegan Sun and Foxwoods and offshore casinos and things like that. It didn't really work that way. But this thing, amazing. Amazing that this turned into like what it is now, because this is not very good.
I mean, I legitimately thought he was gonna go bankrupt, and I was worried about him. And he just kept grinding. I would hear him at night as I was getting ready to go to bed, like calling credit cards and being like, all right, if I transfer all of this money to this credit card, what kind of rate can I get? And just like maneuvering money around just to try to stay alive.
That's also when we started selling t-shirts. And I'm like, I have these ugly shirts, and we'd keep track of how many we sold. So I'd be like, hey, we sold 2 of these this week.
Barstool Sports also had its own local radio spot on Boston's 1510 The Zone.
It was me, Portnoy, and Elio. No one was listening to Barstool Sports Radio except the 15 people that were in the bar that we were in. Dave and I would go back and forth. We would talk about sports, talk about some gambling stuff. We noticed the first show about 30 minutes in, Elio had said, hello, when we first came on the air, and that was it. He had stage fright. I don't know what it was. He just wouldn't talk, and it became kind of part of the humor of the show that this guy was. There were 3 men sitting at a table talking sports, but only 2 men were talking.
I talked to Dave 7 days a week, so it was just the extended part of our conversation. And Dave did 90% of the talking, because me, I'm not much of the talker, and you can't shut Dave up.
Power Hour's back. Terrifically fucked up, as always.
Portnoy would go on to hire a number of different writers who would write in the newspaper for free. He brought on Jamie Chisholm, who wrote under a number of different pseudonyms, Jerry Old Balls Thornton, who still has Old Balls, and Pete Manzo, who was unable to be reached for comment.
Jerry obviously still writes for us, and Jamie and Pete were unbelievably talented writers.
Be able to write about sports in Boston, really whatever you wanted, was really rare. And it was obvious even then that Dave was doing something different, that there was something special about Barstool.
We did kind of a 4-man weave where we all had kind of different voices, but we were all kind of facing the same final point, which was being the voice of the fans that they weren't getting any other place.
It was a great crew. It really was. We were all doing different stuff. We all had other jobs, but each of us, it was exactly what we wanted to be doing.
I mean, I think Pete is still, Manzo, just about the best writer I've ever read. I'd put him up against Simmons in his prime. Like, he is that good.
So I wrote under Jamie Chisholm, my name. I wrote under Pete Powers, which was Dave's attempt to be mysterious. And then Mike Lindell, which was my middle name in the street I was living on.
And these guys were doing it for free. Nobody was getting paid. And I thought, God, what does this guy do? He works for the state or something, Jerry Thornton. And I was finding myself as a non-sports fan looking forward to reading what he was putting out every single week.
I would read the stuff that they read and said, holy shit, I've got to up my game, because this is brilliant. You hear about Lennon listened to Penny Lane and said, God damn, I got to go home and write Strawberry Fields or whatever, because those guys were great.
We hired a company, Labor Ready, to hand out the newspapers when they launched. They're a bunch of homeless people. Half of them didn't show up. Half of them were sleeping. I was driving around yelling at them. That didn't work at all. We fired Labor Ready, and then we used girls the next 4 or 5 weeks to hand out, modeling girls. Way more expensive, but actually kind of worked.
My name is Renee Portnoy, and I currently reside in Boston, Massachusetts. Dave and I met when I was 20 years old. So Dave was hiring girls to hand out the newspaper, and I met him that way.
My buddy McShay, he's like, wait a minute, you're paying models? You're meeting all these models? I'm like, yeah, well, they hand out the newspapers. Dude, we gotta hang out with these girls. And that's how I met Renee.
Dave always carried the biggest Dunkin' Donuts you could imagine. It was a Monster iced coffee, and he kind of had his sideways swagger hat going on. That was basically the first impression.
I think other people, whether it be my parents or Renee at the time, was like, this guy should probably quit this. But it was working.
So I always thought he was really funny, but he was like no one I never met before, and I was a little bit confused as kind of what he was doing and what this business plan was all about.
At one point, I did get another job. Renee made me do it. She's like, we have no money, this isn't working, and you need to get a job.
And this was like kind of a low point, and I think he did it because he felt bad because we actually had $0.
At lunch on the first day, I just left and never came back. It's like, there's no way I can do both these things. But I always thought it was working.
But like, we were so poor that he used to play party poker, one round of party poker to win like $20 so we could like go to lunch, or on a weekend I'd have him play party poker to win $20 so I could get my nails done. Like if he didn't win, then like we were down $10 and then I couldn't even get my nails done and we couldn't go out for lunch.
It never got to that point where I'm like, there's not something around the corner and this is just not happening. It never got to that point.
He worked all the time. I would say on an average day, he probably started working at like 9:30 in the morning. I'd get home from work 6 or 7, we'd eat dinner, and he'd go back to work again, and he wouldn't come to bed until 1, 2 in the morning, and like do that all over again.
Use your upper body strength.
That wasn't that bad. The first 2 covers were her like best friends. A local photographer, his name was Eric Levin, reached out and he basically asked if we ever thought about shooting a local girl for a cover. I was like, not really. He's like, well, I'm happy to do it for you. He was just starting out. It's like, all right, yeah, let's knock it out.
I have not opened this box in at least 5 years, and I haven't looked at these in at least since the time I put them in there probably 10 years ago. So all this stuff's a decade old.
A buddy of mine and I were driving through Faneuil Hall, and he mentioned Barstool Sports and said he was looking, it was like a new newspaper out. And he said, dude, you should like put some pictures on the cover. And there was a little picture of a girl, and I was like, we should do this like Maxim. So I think that night I emailed Dave. He emailed me right back and said, yeah, we'd love to do that. And 2 days later, we shot the first cover.
Looks like Barstool. Issue number 1. What? Hi, Jillian. We made her boobs way bigger. Issue number 1. Is this worth something? It should be. November 2004.
From that point, we put a local girl, on the cover until the newspaper died. So probably like 3 or 4 years. It was the most professional thing we did.
I mean, the whole city knew what Barstool Sports was because of this newspaper. Before it really had an online presence, that was the vehicle that drove Barstool. Having the mix of girls with all the sports stuff, it was the perfect mix, and I think one of the reasons it succeeded in its infancy. The pictures. If you didn't have the cover pictures, you wouldn't have made it.
We had an ice cream truck, just an ice cream truck came by, so we had an impromptu shoot there, and there was this kid, and we were like, hey kid, you want to be in the shot? And the kid's like, sure. So I was just like, all right, look at the girl while we're taking a picture. Anyway, his parents, he's probably like 30 now, his parents wanted to sue the magazine. I remember they were threatening Dave and stuff.
His photo shoots would take forever.
Hi, I'm Melissa. We're here at the Alley Cat, and we're shooting for the next issue of Barstool Sports.
My name's Elsie, and we're shooting the cover of the next Barstool Sports at Waterworks.
Hi, I'm Vanessa. I'm Ashley. And I'm Annie. We work here at Waterworks. Do you want to be on the cover of the next Barstool Sports? Come to Waterworks next Friday night.
And once we did that, advertising opened up. Basically, companies thought we had access to these pretty girls, and that's how you get people in bars, if you have access to pretty girls. So that kind of started the advertising with beer companies. Not the gambling, which I kind of thought it would. It was the girls.
We have Elsie, your favorite. We have Cara Maria, the judge's pick. Cara, please take a step forward.
Stoolies, as readers of the newspaper were called, were very loyal and invested in the success of Barstool. With the addition of advertising, Portnoy was able to host events where Stoolies were able to meet the writers.
An 80s party at Ned Devine's, sponsored by Barstool Sports. Let's go upstairs and check it out. Why 80s party?
I love the 80s. I mean, I love the 80s. It's that simple. Yeah.
Short and sweet.
Yeah, no, I'm a child of the 80s, so whatever, you do what you like.
Exactly. And now why Ned Devine's?
I love Ned Devine's. I mean, is that like the same answer? But no, we have a great relationship with them, Bry Group, The Harp, Ned Devine's, so they're great people. We like doing parties where we get along with the group, so.
The Stoolies back then were just as rabid and just as strong as they are now. There were just far fewer of them. If you could drive traffic to a bar, you could get money. We do March Madness parties. The first March Madness party we did, I showed up and Jamie Chisholm showed up. Very embarrassed.
There were literally 5 people. 5 people showed up. It was Dave, myself, I brought 2 friends, and one random guy showed up who sort of sat by himself. He expended so much of like his own personal time and effort to sort of build Barstool, and every event was sort of another, like, oh shit, does anyone really like this? Is anyone paying attention? But slowly, they started growing.
The next year, we did it at the Place, and probably 250 people showed up.
The energy here is hot as fans watch their favorite teams from across the country compete for the national championship. And there's only one person to blame for all this madness here tonight.
It's just what guys want to do. They just want to sit around all day, kind of drink a lot, get a little bit banged up and lose some money on basketball. So that's what the common guy likes doing. That's what we do.
Actually met the people who were commenting on all the blogs then, who were on the message board. They were super supportive, and that's when I realized, you know what, this is more than just an outlet to write stuff. Like, I've tapped into like a community of people that are way out of my comfort zone, but they were great and they appreciated everything we did.
We did a white party. We did best can contest. We had cover model parties.
The craziest one was probably the white party we did at Waterworks. And I remember Jerry Thornton, sorry Jerry getting escorted out.
All right, there was 2 women there that I was hanging with, I was talking to, and they handed me their phones and went up on stage and started making out with each other. And when I say making out, I mean tops off, bras over their head, playing with boobs. My job was to take pictures and videos with their phones. My proximity to them was enough to get the bouncers to just say, okay, you're out of here. And Dave came out saying, I heard you got kicked out, and I'm telling him the circumstances, and he just said, it's always the last guy you figure. I'm like,
we did a lot of parties, and they became wildly popular, like hard to get into. That was how we kind of survived early.
Dave realized that he needed help with running the events being put on by Barstool. After meeting Renee, Dave met one of her closest friends at the time. He went on to be the first salaried employee, and he was still bald when they first met.
My name is Paul Golzinski. I've been at Barstool in some capacity since 2004. My introduction to Barstool was through Renee. She was like my #1 best girlfriend by far. She was like, I met this guy from Barstool, and I remember making fun of him. I remember, because I was really good friends with her, and I was like protective in a way, being like, oh, Barstool, like you're going out with Barstool. And it was nothing, it was just a newspaper, so it was like, oh, you're going out with I would call Dave Portnoy Barstool. Going to school in Boston, I lived with 5 other guys. We all went to different colleges in Boston. And for him, initially, it was like, how do we get people to go to these events that he was doing? So having a network of friends from different schools, I was like, hopefully I can draw, like, I don't want to say a promoter, but I was like, let me bring my network with me to these events. So that's how it started. It was, 6 of me and my 5 buddies would bring our groups of friends to different events, so there would be people there. And as I'd go to events as like a civilian, I would just have like a great time there, and I'd just be like, hey, do you need any help? Like, just keep asking, like, hey, do you need help with anything? We became closer where we were friends enough to be like, hey, I'm interested in like working for you.
Dave needed help, and he had kind of known Paul a little bit, and Paul was looking for a job. I don't know what type of qualifications he thought he had to get this job, but I pretty much vouched for Paul, and maybe I changed Paul, Sale Guy's life by giving him this opportunity, which he's really never thanked me for. So I introduced, I guess, basically Dave and Paul, and then vouched for him to be the sales guy.
And he's like, I don't have the money to like hire anyone full time, but if you want to do sales, you can keep like a high percent. I think I was getting like 25% of all sales I made. So I remember walking across the city, like literally from Alston all the way to Faneuil Hall, stopping in every bar and restaurant being like, you should advertise with this newspaper. And you want to be with us, this is where the guys are. Like, this is where your people that come in want to be.
We had this old ambulance, but it wasn't like an ambulance. It was like a makeshift ambulance. Thing would break down 24/7. It was literally like a hazard to drive in the street. And we need promo girls. So we'd throw a bunch of nurses in there and they'd go around and we'd do McGillicuddy shots. Jenna Marbles, that's where I met Jenna Marbles.
So there was a couple times when there was definitely like a bigger advertiser, and it would get bigger over time, but every time we'd think like, oh, this is it, like we've made it. And one was a big one that helped us buy our first place, and that allowed us to buy that first house. But we were like waiting by like the skin of our teeth for this money to come through so we could buy the house. Like if it didn't happen, like we weren't getting it.
I remember my first like $20,000 sale. I went crazy. It was like, I was so happy. I was competing with like spare change guy. So it's like I was muscling spare change guy. Even when I go to Celtics games now or the Garden, some of the ticket scalpers still like recognize me because I used to hang out with them. They're like, oh, good to see you doing well, Dave. It's like, thanks, guy.
The last question I have is, it's summing up Dave. How would you sum up Dave in 3 words or a couple of sentences, I guess, if you can?
So how would I describe Dave? He is relentless, but like in the best way possible. Relentlessly trying for what he believes in and relentlessly standing up for his side of things, which can go both ways, but he's relentless. And his relentless dedication to building this company and to building the brand is like I said before, it's like superhero status. No one else could have done what he did. Dave's also the most loyal guy you'll ever meet. Like if you're in Dave's circle, like he would do anything for you. And he's the funniest guy ever. I haven't found anyone as funny as Dave.